All right, welcome to March's Q&A for my Patreon supporters, and I'm going to jump straight into it this month because I haven't got a lot of free time this morning to do this video. But I've got three questions, and I should be able to rattle through them without too much difficulty. So the first two are from Peter Stebbing, and they're related. So I'm probably going to merge them into one big question in one discussion. And the third question, the last question, is from Martin Wagemakers, and I'll handle that afterwards. So jumping straight in, Peter mentions that Free League, getting my acronyms mixed up. Free League have really made use of a number of big IPs recently. Which IPs are you surprised that RPG companies haven't got hold of next? Which IPs do you think will be licensed next? Which IP would you most like to see, and how would you like the game to work? That's a lot of discussion packed into one question there. My money is on Willow. That's a pretty smart guess. And a new iteration of Star Wars. Okay, and the second question, which is kind of related, is also, aside from the marketing and finance side, what are the advantages and disadvantages of using a big IP? Can it have a benefit at the table, or might it take something away from the experience of role-playing? I'm going to actually address that second question first before I launch into what I'd like to see in terms of IPs and which ones I think might be coming next, although I have absolutely no idea of what Free League are working on. They always keep that very secretive. So also, the obvious marketing and financial side, parking that off to one side, the advantages and disadvantages of using a big IP. The marketing, you don't want me to talk about marketing, but that is the advantage, really. You mentioned benefits at the table, and having a world that people can instantly visualize because they're familiar with it is a huge draw. I've played a lot of Star Wars and run a lot of Star Wars in the past, and also Warhammer, and Warhammer Fantasy specifically. And these are very lore-rich settings, which I have found with the right group, you're instantly in the world. You know the laws of the world. You know the customs of the world. You know what you can get away with, what you can't get away with. And that means that generally there's an element of, some role-playing habits like murder hoboism that people just don't partake in unless they do it very deliberately because they know what the repercussions are going to be in world. Whereas I think when you have IPs that are a little bit newer, players are more likely to push against the boundaries of what they perceive may or may not be a law or a custom or a rule in the setting to see, what the repercussions will be. Almost like a toddler pushing against the boundaries, or not just a toddler. I have a 7-year-old and a toddler, and they're both pushing boundaries in different ways. So much like children push against boundaries that parents set for them, players will push against boundaries in unestablished IPs to try and figure out how the world works. And that can be a good thing or a bad thing. It really depends on your players. I think I know, Peter, that you play with, school kids in a school group, and they're probably much more likely to do that, to push against things. Personally, this is why I generally play my games in the real world, because in the real world, you know what the rules are, or if it's in a near future setting or a historical setting, it's very easy to get that information across to your players with the very, you don't have to worry about bombarding them with all sorts of new information for the setting. You're just basically saying, this is the time period, or if you're going a little bit into the future, you basically just give them a little idea of who's in charge in terms of like government. So they basically kind of have an idea of what they can and can't do in the setting. So from my perspective, that's kind of the big advantage of a big licensed IP. It's that recognition at the table, and I think it's a big draw. However, that's not to say that you can't make an original IP. You can't make it work. You absolutely can. It's just I think there are the downside to it is that push against the invisible boundaries that players are inevitably going to do. And if you have players who are less mature, they're potentially going to derail the tone of your game in trying to figure out what that is. So, yeah, if you play with mature players, then you're probably not going to have so much of a problem. Anyway, that's the second question addressed, I think. Hopefully I've addressed it enough. If not, let me know, Peter, and we can discuss offline on Discord. The first question then, let's unpack it one by one. Which IPs am I surprised that RPG companies haven't got hold of? There aren't many, to be honest. You mentioned Willow. Willow is an obvious one, especially now that there's a TV series about it. But a lot of the big IPs have been snapped up by role-playing companies. There are a few exceptions, and I'm really looking at fantasy here, fantasy IPs. The obvious ones are the ones that cross multiple media genres. So things like Lord of the Rings, A Song of Ice and Fire. Those are the big ones jumping out at me. Those obviously both have tabletop role-playing game iterations, as does Discworld. There's a GURPS Discworld book. Although Discworld I'll be coming back to because that is a really old, in terms of role-playing life cycle, that's a relatively old license now. And I think that would be one that could benefit from having a reboot. So I'll talk about that in a second. But I'm struggling to think of any other ones that haven't been snapped up that are obvious, like big ones that have, either a film or a TV series tie-in that really have captured the public's imagination. And by public's imagination, I mean more than the kind of niche fantasy geeks. Yeah. I mean, there's the, oh God. Eye of the World. What's that series called? It's just escaping me at the moment. I've read the entire series. Amazon did the reboot or did a series on it. Oh my God, I should know this. I can't even think of. I'm thinking of Brandon Sanderson, who finished the series. Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time. There we go. The Wheel of Time series has had a role-playing implementation a while ago. It wasn't very popular. I don't know of anyone who plays it or even talks about it. That's obviously a fantasy setting ripe for play. However, for Free League, so those are the ones that I think could be snapped up. In terms of sci-fi, again, a lot of the cool sci-fi settings like Altered Carbon, Expanse, Star Wars, Star Trek, the kind of big ones that have really been quite popular recently, they've all been snapped up, and they all have role-playing game iterations, which are more or less popular. Judge Dredd obviously is a big IP. We're getting a series potentially and another film from that IP. And there is a role-playing game. There was a role-playing game. I think the license just went back to Rebellion from EN World, or whatever they're called, the publishing arm. Yeah, 40K obviously has a role-playing game. Yeah, I think sci-fi is... I mean, there's a ton of... I read a lot of sci-fi as well. There are a lot of cool sci-fi series. Asimov has done a number of, sci-fi series, I guess, like individual series within his kind of canon. We got the Foundation series. There's the whole robot trilogy that could be made into a game theoretically, but they're quite niche. I think they don't really have the wider, broad appeal. Obviously, Foundation was made into a TV series, but I don't see that being a bankable IP really from a marketing perspective. I don't think personally. Foundation was quite divisive with people in terms of who liked it and who didn't. A lot of people found it boring, and that's not really what you want going in. I know The Walking Dead. There's been a lot of people who have gone off the show from sort of halfway through the total number of seasons. A lot of people kind of got to about season 5, maybe up to season 6, around the Negan plot line, and then dropped it. Myself included. I dropped it for a time, then I came back. I'm currently watching... I actually didn't finish season 10. I started watching season 10. I was like, I can't get through 24 episodes of this. I just want to know how it ends, and then I'm going to watch season 11, which I'm currently in the middle of. to find out how, because I know season 11 is the final season. So I watched a recap of season 10 on YouTube, so kind of cheated there to find out, what the major plot lines are, what happened in there, so that going into season 11, I kind of am up to speed, and I don't regret it for 1 minute. I got the salient points of what happened, and I'm now into season 11. Anyway, let's move on. That kind of answers my question in terms of which ones haven't got hold of next. I can't really off the top of my head think of any, especially ones that would be suited for Free League. So I'm going to stop there. Which IPs do you think will be licensed next? I'm assuming with Free League, because that's really the only people that I'm kind of considering here. I don't know. I would love to see Free League tackle Discworld. I would love to see Discworld is very different in terms of tone from what Free League usually do. It's obviously satirical, and we don't have really any comedy games from Free League. They tend to be gritty and dark, but it could be interesting to see a gritty take on Discworld. I mean, if you focus specifically on Ankh-Morpork, or however you decide to pronounce that, because I've listened to recently started listening to some of the audiobooks from Discworld, and I've been surprised at different narrators pronouncing that differently, which is a little bit jarring. In my head, it's always been Ankh-Morpork, not Ankh-Morpork or whatever. Anyway, Discworld would be cool. I think Free League might not go for that because of the tone issue. It doesn't really fit their existing style. Another series which I think is very popular, at least in literary circles, is Patrick Rothfuss's Kingkiller Chronicles. It's obviously not finished yet, and yet it is very popular. I've read the two main books in the series. I think it's a very rich setting. It's also quite gritty and dark, and it would make a really cool role-playing setting. There are some other ones I've written down here on a little card in terms of IPs that I would like to, I think could make good role-playing games, but I don't think there are any. Answering the question of which do I think will be licensed next, I think it would be Willow, which is what you've mentioned. Your money's on Willow. I agree with you there, because Willow is in the public eye right now. It was a very popular movie, obviously, back in the day. It's got George Lucas behind it, and now Disney. There are probably issues with how much that would cost, that license, because it's pretty big. I imagine it would be quite an expensive license, and how popular is Willow? Is it bankable? I don't know. Maybe. And if we look at the existing licenses that Free League have picked up, the latest three, Alien, Blade Runner, and The Walking Dead, I believe are all with. They're kind of, I don't know. There's some relations there between studios who own the IP, I think. At least I've seen John Favreau involved on The Walking Dead, and I think he's involved on Alien as well. People have been asking for a Predator game, and I think that could be a very real possibility, not as an expansion for Alien, but as a completely separate game. The only question is, how would you pitch that game? What would the gameplay loop be about? What would the setting be? And I struggle to find an answer to that question, because the movies are quite focused in terms of plot. They're not really, they're set in our own world, and or in the past or in the future, and I don't think there's as much world building there as the Alien series or the Alien world, because the Alien world is set in a very specific period of our future. There's a ton of lore behind it, which is obviously ripe pickings for a role-playing game. And Predator just kind of is spread all over the place and dips into things like the Alien world, etc. Obviously the tie-ins and things. So I don't know. I think Predator, a lot of people would like to see that. I don't. It won't be happening as an expansion for Alien. Free League have confirmed this in the past, because it's. I think it's different IP holders, or it would have to be a different license. So I doubt that we'll ever see a Predator expansion for the Alien role-playing game. But as I say, having a Predator game as a standalone title for me doesn't seem like it's a good fit for how Free League build their games. So I don't think we would see that. So my money's on Willow. You mentioned a new iteration of Star Wars. I like Edge of the Empire. I had gone off it for a time, but I very nearly started playing again in a play-by-post campaign, which died before it started, as many of them do. And getting prepared for that, creating the character, looking at the rules again, I got quite excited about it because it is a fun system, and I just got burnt out. I think I played a ton of it for a period of time, and yeah. Anyway, I won't go down that rabbit hole. I don't see Star Wars being relicensed personally. And if it did get relicensed, I'm not sure it's a good fit for Free League. I know a lot of people would like to see it because they like the mechanics, but Free League, again, go for a more gritty style. If they went for a more Mandalorian feel, then that might work, or focusing on Andor, or really focusing on the Outer Rim, much like Edge of the Empire does, that would work. But you'd inevitably have to go into the Force, because a huge part of the Star Wars fandom is obsessed with the Force, and obviously the prequel trilogies, etc. And it just doesn't fit the themes and the tone that Free League usually do. So, and you'd have to do it at some point. You really would. So I don't know. I would love to see. In fact, I'm working on my own Star Wars, rule set for using the Year Zero engine. But I don't really necessarily think that it's something that Free League would tackle. It would be bankable for sure. Like, getting and there's other issues as well. Like Star Wars doesn't, the role playing license for Star Wars does not allow PDFs. It does not allow virtual tabletops, because that in the licensing, particulars of Disney, or however they've set up these licenses, that treads on the feet of what is considered electronic games, which obviously Electronic Arts, EA, have access to for the Star Wars universe. So that's why we have never seen official PDFs for any of the Star Wars role-playing games. We haven't seen virtual tabletop implementations for them, because they're just not allowed under the license. So that might also be considered too strict of a license for Free League. I don't know. Anyway, so Willow's a good choice there. That's possibly the one I think I would be seen as the next one being licensed by them. Yeah. Okay. And which IP would I most like to see, and how would you like the game to work? So I'm going to go through my list of licenses I would like to see. You're going to hear me geeking out about a lot of my fantasy series I really love. I've already mentioned the Patrick Rothfuss Kingkiller Chronicles. That's a very dark setting, and I think it could work quite well. Another setting I love to spend time in, reading, is Robin Hobb's Realm of the Elderlings, which is a number of different trilogies. There's just a lot of really interesting lore there, and I think that is also a really rich setting ripe for a role-playing game. Again, some of these are going to be a little bit niche potentially. I mean, Robin Hobb, most of these are best-selling fantasy, series I'm going to be mentioning, which are very popular in fantasy circles, but for a wider public knowledge of what these games are about, just not there, with some exceptions. And I'll talk about the exceptions first, maybe the more popular ones. I've already mentioned Discworld. I'd love to see that, but again, I think the tone might not be right. Stephen King's Dark Tower is an interesting one. I think that could be made into a role-playing game. Quite a kind of head-trippy one. I don't know if it's something that Stephen King... I don't know of any Stephen King role-playing game adaptations. That's the obvious one, if any of them would be made. I don't know how Stephen King feels about role-playing games, whether he would allow them to be licensed or not. So... might not ever happen, but that could be an interesting one. Obviously, there's a lot of darkness there. Free League are generally tend to go for the darker tones, the more horror, focused, themes. So in that, I think Cook's Black Company series is a good fit. Again, a little bit niche. Garth Nix's Abhorsen trilogy is obviously kind of like fantasy horror. You've got the whole undead, death angle there with necromancy, etc. That could be quite a good fit as well. with traveling between the living world and the dead world and dealing with all that. Um, Abercrombie, Joe Abercrombie's First Law trilogy and the second follow-on trilogy and his new trilogy. I love Abercrombie. I think the world is really interesting. It would be a really interesting world to play in, but there's a lot of intrigue in there. And I haven't seen a lot of fantasy intrigue by Free League yet. So I think for me, that's what I would really like to see next is a fantasy world that has a big focus on intrigue and how that would be handled. A gritty fantasy setting focusing on intrigue. Saying that, I am working on my own game with two other people, which is exactly that, kind of a fantasy Renaissance setting, heavily inspired by Renaissance Italy, called Stiletto, and it's a massively intrigue-heavy game. It's really inspired by games like Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay as well. So, I'm hoping to get that out for crowdfunding this year. Probably towards the middle to end of this year. And, I doubt we'll see anything from Free League that's similar in that time. I really hope not, at least, because that would really scupper plans that we have for this game. But yeah, Abercrombie's First Law, tying in with that, Scott Lynch's Gentleman Bastard series. I love that series. It would be really cool to see a role-playing game set in that series because there's some really interesting world building going on in there, too. China Miéville's new Crobuzon as a city and the Baz Lag trilogy in general. I love Perdido Street Station. It's probably, if not my favorite book, it's in the top 3. It's inspired by role-playing. I know that China has spoken with with basically Zach S., about doing a role-playing version of that. That's never been finished. I don't know what's happening there now with that, with Zach kind of no longer being in the scene for good reason. But it would, I think Miéville is a really cool guy, and, obviously he's got poor choice in friends in the past, but he's a really cool guy who has made an amazing world there. And I would love to see that coming to a role playing game. I would play it. I would buy it if it comes out. If it's a fifth edition game, that's probably one I would definitely back. I almost backed the Hellboy one. I love Hellboy. I almost backed the 5th edition one, but in the end, I was kind of like, it's from a board game company and it's 5th edition. I don't think it's probably going to be worth it. I'll wait until the reviews come out from people I trust before spending any money on it. But if there was especially a new Crobuzon-focused Baz Lag role-playing game, I would buy it in a heartbeat. I would back it in a heartbeat. Obviously not if Zach S. was involved or RPG Pundit or any of those kind of, those kind of guys. But otherwise, if there was a kind of at least a half decent person behind it, I would be backing that in a heartbeat because I love it so much. Ursula K. Le Guin's Earthsea series has also had some multimedia crossover. That could be interesting too. I wouldn't call it gritty necessarily. It's quite high fantasy or high magic. But there is a lot of interesting world building there. You've obviously got like these kind of raiding pirate factions there. It's cool to have a world which is full of islands, which is very different. I think that could be quite fun to play. Obviously, Forbidden Lands are going to be coming out with Free League are going to be coming out with Forbidden Lands expansion going off to the east of the Ravenlands map, which is going to be nautical themed. So we're kind of scratching that itch, but it would be cool to see an Earthsea RPG, I think. And just looking at this, I read the first part of Jemison's Broken Earth trilogy, which is called, I think, the 5th season. That had some interesting world building in it. It might be a bit too high fantasy, but it's definitely a gritty world and a gritty setting. It's just, I don't know how you would have players in it that aren't basically demigods, because they're the movers and shakers, it seems to me, there with the that magical college or whatever it is. And yeah, I think that's my list. I think that kind of covers everything I would like to see. Really, you mentioned how would I like the game to work? Which IP would I most like to see? How would I make it work? New Crobuzon. I think, an RPG focused on New Krobuzon. Um, because, yeah. And I would make it work basically like how I'm doing Stiletto right now. Stiletto is focused on a single city, and it's all the intrigue to go in there. It's a very gritty and dark city. Um, it's very dark fantasy, and New Krobuzon I would handle in exactly the same way. I would focus on the intrigue. I would focus on all the different factions, all the tension in the city, all the things that are happening there, and really lean into all of that. Basically, what Perdido Street Station talks about if you take away the monster plot, and really go to town with making a massive city sandbox with a lot of tools to help with faction intrigue. So if you want to know exactly how I do that, then check out Stiletto. I have a public playtest version of the rules, which are still work in progress. If you want to check out how I've tackled the Year Zero engine for that, I'll put a link in the description. So if you haven't seen it yet, you can see that. For this video will be going live to the public after about a month. So the link I'll be putting to the description, I'll put 2 links in the description. One will be for the public playtest, and the second will be for the Patreon post, where I have the full work in progress manuscript, which has more information, obviously, is more up to date. So if you're watching this and you're a member of the public and your appetite is whetted, then you can see more of the Stiletto manuscript, but you've got to be a Patreon to get access to it. So click on that second link and you'll get taken to that one. Okay, so anyway, I'll move on. Thank you very much, Peter. That's obviously a very, very big double question there, and hopefully I've answered it to your satisfaction. Okay, last question is from Martin. He asks, I seem to remember you buying heavily into Degenesis 2, yeah, because I know Martin has as well, even getting the Justician books. How much buyer's remorse do you have for that, or do you ever see yourself using anything from the Degenesis line? To be clear, I've actually not bought into the Genesis at all. I received review copies for all of the books that I have in it, so I have no buyer's remorse. The only remorse I have is in positively reviewing the game without actually reading through the end of the campaign, Black Atlantic specifically, which very badly handles themes of sexual assault. Effectively railroading the player. This is a big spoiler, but I think it's worth mentioning. The writers of the game, or the writer of the game of that adventure, who is also basically the creator of the whole thing, he wrote a rape scene that involves the player characters, or a player character, and cannot be avoided without, like, if you run the campaign as it's written, it's a railroaded scene that you can't avoid. It's integral to the plot. So you'd have to really come up with your own way as a GM to avoid it, which I would highly recommend avoiding it, because it's handled in a terrible way. And really it just feels like, a bit of exploitation, sexual violence as exploiting sexual violence for a game never feels right for me. It doesn't have any safety tools mentioned in the game. It's kind of just assumed that the group is going to be mature enough. The author, in defending it, has been very, very clear that they don't give a shit about these sorts of things, about safety in games. And it really has put me off the entire game, which is a shame, because I did like the mechanics. It's kind of similar to Year Zero engine in a way. It's a D6 dice pool game where you're looking for not just 6s, but I think 4s, 5s, and 6s if memory serves. And if you get a 6, it's kind of I think it's called like a trigger or something. It's like an even better result. You can get extra things with your roll. It's a fairly simple system, a fairly simple dice pool system. It's not going to win any awards for innovation or anything, but it works in my opinion. I've only run it once, and only as a one shot. The world behind it is quite rich, almost too lore heavy, and it's not presented in a way which is easy to absorb the information. So, yeah, and the artwork is stunning. The layout is stunning of the books. But you can tell it's been made by an art house, an art studio, and not by a role-playing studio, because there is a bit of a barrier to entry there. The fan base is also borderline rabid in terms of defending it, which isn't very great. They can be great if you need help. If you're interested in it and you like the game, then they're a very friendly bunch, very welcoming and getting you on board. But if you have any criticisms of the game, they tend to be pretty toxic. And yeah, I don't really recommend it anymore at all for anyone. Obviously, the entire DeGenesis line has been now dropped by the publisher, by the creator. Yeah, I mean the whole entire product line could have been a successful game if the creator would have let go of a bit of control and would have taken on some role playing expertise from other people to make it into a successful product, which he didn't do. He's a control freak and didn't want to do that. So, and I'm happy to say that on my YouTube channel. Yeah. I went to their office in Berlin for an interview, and just with the understanding was it was going to be with the creator of the game, and I spent my own money booking a train to Berlin. Got there, and I basically didn't get access to him. He didn't see me, and I was like, oh, he must not be in. And then at the end of the me being shown around and talking through with someone else in the office about the game, he popped his head in. This guy's called Marco. Popped his head in to say goodbye because he was leaving the office. He'd been in the office the whole time, and just didn't want to talk to me. So that was kind of, I felt that was very rude because he knew I was coming. They had agreed to do like an interview, and in the end didn't bother. So there's a bit of arrogance with this guy. That obviously was put a sour taste in my mouth. I still gave him a glowing review on the podcast when I did that. But it did leave a bit of a sour taste in my mouth, and all the stuff that came out afterwards kind of made me think like, okay, this kind of fits the character, the very little of the character I met. Also, interacting, or not interacting, but watching him on his Discord and how he responded to criticism kind of painted a very clear picture. And talking to some other people here in Germany who have dealt with him as well in the community. The role-playing community. So anyway, I'm not going to go on a big rant down that rabbit hole. I've already started dipping down it. I'm going to come back out. Do I ever see myself using anything from the DeGenesis line? No, I don't think so. I'm looking at selling all of my DeGenesis books. I have actually sold one of the campaign books already. And at some point, I've gone through my role-playing shelves, and I have been trying to clear out games that realistically I'm never going to be playing, so I can fit more space in for buying more books, which I've not told my wife. I've told my wife I'm clearing it out so that I don't have as many games, but in reality I'm going to keep buying games, aren't I? And I have a big pile of books on the side here, which are of role-playing books I'm going to be selling, and DeGenesis is in that pile. All the DeGenesis books, they're pretty, they look nice, but ultimately I'm never going to play the game. I don't recommend the game, and I don't want to kind of support that, that creator really. So I don't really want to be introducing new people to the game or running it for my YouTube channel or anything like that. So it's going. I still have the PDFs because the PDFs were all free. But yeah, it's gone. So, and the last question you asked, you said getting into the Justician books. I had considered buying the Justician books, even though, having said all that stuff, even though I was kind of off the game because of the creator by the time they came out, just because they they looked really pretty, and that's the big draw for DeGenesis, is as a guy like myself who loves layout. I find them incredibly beautiful, the books, the art, not just the artwork but the layout as well. I mean, they are a masterclass in how to lay out books. And the Justician books are more of the same, but in a sandbox setting. Like, they had that slipcase, and just the whole way it was kind of packaged and put together had me really excited about seeing how this art studio would tackle a sandbox role-playing like expansion. So I very nearly bought that, but in the end it was kind of like the price was so high, and I didn't really want to give any of my money to Six More Vodka. So I decided, you know what? No, I'm not buying that. I don't know, I'm just getting tempted by the by the pretty pictures and the cool layout, but ultimately I don't want to give them any money, so I didn't. That's me. Thank you very much for the questions, Peter and Martin. I will not be having a Q&A next month. I'm going to be a little bit cagey about this, but there's basically some big work that is dropping into my lap that's going to require my full attention. So I'm going to be pausing my Patreon payments in April while I focus completely all of my free time on this project, which has a very short turnaround time. That means no Q&A, no new content, nothing. I am taking a break from all of my, hobby projects for a month while I laser focus on this thing that's fallen into my lap, which is quite exciting. I will be talking more about that. I'll probably do a short YouTube video just explaining why there's going to be a month's delay. The reason I'm not mentioning specifically what it is now is because the contract has not been finalized yet. I haven't signed it yet, so it would be premature of me to mention details before the ink has dried, so to speak. I have seen a contract. It's just there needed to be some changes to it, which I've suggested, and there's that little back and forth. So until that happens, I'm not mentioning what it is. But it is a freelance project I'll be getting money for, so that's why, with a short turnaround time, so that's why I need to have this focus. Anyway, so I will catch you not next month, but the month after, probably. Obviously, if the contract stuff doesn't work out and I don't get this, then it'll be business as usual. But I've seen the contract. Everything seems to be going fine. It's just small niggling things that are being ironed out right now. So in all likelihood, it'll be May before the next Q&A comes. So thanks very much for watching. Thanks very much for the questions, you two. And catch you next time. Cheers. Bye-bye.